The company that I applied for said they wouldn't hire me. They don't hire black people. They just straight up told me that via text.
Wow. It's not nearly as valuable as like learning to like do marketing or sales better would be, you know, because the combination of those is a lot more unique. It's rarer and it's like, I would argue, more valuable.
Humans don't. Sorry, I might be getting a little bit esoteric, but like, we don't care much about facts as much as people think that we do. Like, we, as a human, evolution has made us care more about stories. If you've managed to make it to the stage of the salary negotiation, 9 times out of 10, you are the best person in that pool of candidates that they found. If it was strictly about the money, I'd move to the US.
Karoshi, which is like working oneself to death, you know. There's all these crazy, scary kind of memes about working in Japan. Welcome to the Japan Dev Podcast. I am Eric, founder of JapanDev.com, and today I am sitting down with Terrance Reynolds, who is a designer slash software engineer slash content creator who's been in Japan for about 8 years. And I'm extremely excited to get into this conversation. Welcome, Terrance.
Thank you for having me, man. I'm excited to be on the platform. I'm a big fan of your website and a lot of the work that you've done so far.
Thanks. I'm a huge fan of a lot of the content that you're putting out. I think it's some of the most interesting stuff about like tech in Japan, working as a software engineer in Japan. So I was actually really excited about this interview. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Cool. Now, I guess just to start off, let's just talk a little bit, I guess, about your kind of background. You're from Cleveland, Ohio in the US.
Yes.
And what was your like first kind of initial exposure to Japan?
I think I experienced Japan just like subtly, like in terms of my exposure. It wasn't like there was like a moment that I can like point to, you know what I mean? Like where I'm like, oh hey man, I went to like a local, like a little Tokyo in my city. There isn't one. Or like maybe I went to some sort of like exchange program. It was just more so just like the impression that, you know, Japan made on any kid that, you know, grew up in the 90s in terms of like anime, video games, and culture such as that. I think that always had an impression on, left an impression on me. I wouldn't say that those things necessarily inspired me to move here, because even at that young of an age, I didn't have like any like goal of like leaving the US or anything like that. And my actual desire to like move to Japan probably happened a year before I did it. So yeah, it wasn't something that I was like, this is what I've been dreaming to do.
Okay. Yeah. It's crazy how frequently I hear that. Actually, it's like, yeah, I watched like some Pokemon cartoons or anime, you know, when I was a kid. And it's just, I think it just is like the seed that kind of maybe like implants itself in the back of your mind. And it's there, but then you don't really act on it. You don't know even maybe that it's there. And then when you graduate from college or whatever happens, you decide to do it, you know. So that's a super common story. I think pretty much everyone I've talked to on this podcast has had some like version of that, where it's either like games or like cartoons or comics that was the actual initial exposure that they had. So you, I guess, were interested in like design and also coding, I think. Was that like from a young age? Were you interested in both, or did it start out as like design first and then morph into programming later? Or like how did that interest kind of come about?
That's a great question. You remember MySpace?
Of course. Who doesn't?
That's where my interest came about. I remember being like in like middle school or early elementary school, just playing around with like MySpace pages. Like all of my friends had one at the time, were like 10 to like 13 years old. I always been a person who wanted to express themselves. I mean, you kind of see that even in my content to this day. So it wasn't enough for me to have just like some sort of run of the mill like MySpace theme that I just paste into like part of like that. I'm on my last 2 years of college. This is when I started to study marketing and stuff. And just so I can understand, like, hey, because my goal was like, yo, when I graduate at 20, I'm going to like start my own business. And in order for me to like fully understand my customers' needs, I need to be able to build websites for them and design it and make sure it looks well. And also, how do I align that design with their brand and, you know, their overall goal of like trying to connect with their customers? So eventually by the time I'm 20, I have my own little like freelance business. I also subcontracted through another freelance business. There's a lot of confusion about my backstory. The guy who ran his business called Jetpack Group was like a mentor to me. So we kind of work hand in hand. I have my own clients, but I also work with him. And we began to just design websites for people. And just do it for like a lot of the nonprofits that were in Cleveland. In some cases, like all around the U.S., and we even had a few international clients. And sorry, this is a long-winded answer, but I was pragmatic. So even by that stage, I started learning a little bit about photography, because once you start, when you're constantly trying to meet customers' needs, you're like, okay, they want good design. They want the design to connect with their brand, which connects with their audience. Oh, they don't have like the supporting brand assets. So let me be able to make them those things, whether it's like, subcontracting logo designers or me taking the camera and like shooting some of their like brand images for them, just so we can give them that overall high quality package. So yeah, that's how I got into like design. The development answer comes a little bit later once I moved to Japan.
Okay. So it seems like, it started with design. And then in order to implement the designs that you wanted to, first with MySpace, later with the clients that you were building websites for, you needed the HTML and the CSS, right?
Yeah.
It's like a tool to implement a design that you kind of had that you wanted to actually create, right? Yeah. So not the other way. It wasn't like you liked programming and had to do some design too because you wanted to build a website. It was like started with the design side, right?
Yeah. I just kept picking things up along the way. And by the time I, moved to Japan, and maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead in the story here, but once I moved to Japan, I had like a portfolio of client work that I've done for people. And I came here as an English teacher. So I worked as an ALT, shout out to Interact. Did that for like a year and a half, but obviously that wasn't something I wanted to do for the long haul. We can get into that if you want. But I was like, okay, the writing is on the wall being an English teacher here. And I began teaching myself the programming side, because living as a software engineer in Tokyo was not the plan. Like that was my plan. That was my plan C, actually, to give a little bit more of my backstory. Okay. My last semester at university, I used to live in Hong Kong. And I studied like business and marketing while I was in Hong Kong. And then I traveled to Japan, and I was like, wow, this place is really, really cool. So when I went back to Cleveland and I had the business going, I remember talking to my mentors at the time. I was torn between like, do I continue with the business or do I, travel? Because growing up in Cleveland, I grew up like in a very modest family, to say the least. So I never traveled. I don't think I ever left the state like as a child. So to see the world, I was like, man, do I really want to just stay in Cleveland and just work on the business for years on end? Or do I want to like re-experience what that was like studying abroad in Hong Kong, but actually live in a different country? So I began looking for places to live. One was Korea, one was Japan. And I also thought like Europe, but you needed to have a teaching certificate. So again, it's all a process of elimination for me. Korea and Japan didn't have one. And then I chose Japan because I was familiar with it at the time. At the time, I thought I would just be here for 6 months because I wanted to get my master's degree in Hong Kong because I loved it so much. So Japan was just like a stopping point. Moved to Japan for 6 months, quit mid-contract, and then go get my master's degree in Hong Kong. I got accepted into the program, but I didn't get the scholarship. So anything about Hong Kong economics, too expensive, at least for me. So I stayed in Japan as an English teacher, which I was like, this was never the plan to do this more than a year. So I'm just like, okay, what do? I begin to look for web design jobs in Hong Kong again, because I'm like, that is really where I wanted to go, like Hong Kong. But the jobs that I applied for didn't take me seriously. And then, the industry shifted. It started becoming more heavy on like JavaScript around this time, with the introduction of SPAs and stuff. So it wasn't just someone who you couldn't just get a job as a front-end developer knowing HTML and CSS. I was like, okay, that's a barrier. Then I thought about teaching English in mainland China. I was like, okay, well, at the time, I'm like, I don't really want to be a tech guy. Like, that's never been my goal. Like, learning HTML, CSS was just a tool for me. It wasn't the end-all, be-all. So I'm like, okay, I want to do business. I want to get into marketing because I have my own business. Let me go teach English in China and get like a master's degree online. But teaching English in China, I don't know how to say this. The company that I applied for said they wouldn't hire me. They don't hire black people. They just straight up told me that via text. Like, they just don't do it. He was like, I don't have a problem with you personally, but the school would prefer someone who is like non-color to teach there. But we can offer you like less, like a fraction of the pay if you're willing to go to the school that no one wants to go to in the countryside. I didn't want that. I didn't want that. So I was just like, okay, forget about China. what's the next door I can go down? And at the time, I'm like, okay, well, but I already have the HTML and CSS part, so how hard could it be to learn JavaScript? So I started to like teach myself JavaScript, and by that time I started applying for jobs. I remember, man, because I had technically zero experience, I kind of had to like reinterpret my experience technically, if you know what I mean, on my resume and stuff. And I started to reach out to people via LinkedIn, man. I remember in one of my videos I talked about it, where I wasn't just applying for the jobs, but I had LinkedIn Premium at the time. And I was just reaching out to people who posted the job. You just ask them directly, hey, I'm really passionate about this position. Give them a cover letter, give them a story. 90% of people just told me like they didn't care. Like they just didn't care. I didn't get the job. But one of the companies took a chance on me, and that's how I kind of like ended up as like software engineer in Tokyo. That's my story basically.
Yeah. So that's a really great tip, actually, I think. So one, the LinkedIn Premium. I mean, it's not super cheap. I think it might be like $100 or something like that for like the recruiter or whatever it is, premium plan. But that's for a month, and you can do a lot in 1 month, right? Yeah. If you're like doing it all day long, you can reach out to a lot of hiring managers. So like, just get that for a month or two, whatever, and then directly reach out, because sometimes on the LinkedIn job post, it'll show the hiring manager or someone from the company who's associated with that position, and you can literally just DM them, and 90+% of candidates will not do that. So that will put you pretty much at the top already, because now they have 2 touch points with you instead of just one with the resume or whatever, which they might never see, right? That's
exactly.
Yeah, that, and just like a personalized message, a personalized, like you said, the kind of cover letter goes so far.
But yeah, that's exactly what I did. So like LinkedIn, there's the recruiter plan, but you also have like just like the regular plan, which is about half the price. And if you're, and they're always running sales, so you can like it's like the plan's like usually
like
around like 50
and stuff too, right?
Yeah, but you can get like a trial or a sell, because I just got the notification like, hey, do you want to reactivate for like $30 a month? No, I don't need to. But I applied for a lot of companies my first go around. I mean, I applied for Line, like all the major tech companies. Yeah, I got told no each time. And it's fine. I mean, I was kind of expected. But the company that I ended up finding, I think they were looking for like 5 years of experience around the time. Clearly, I didn't have that. I can probably, argue with, hey, well, my prior like freelance work, I have about like 3 years of experience realistically. But yeah, I reached out to like the perfect size company. They're not too big where they have like this elongated hiring process. Like a lot of these tech companies follow like the cracking the code format of like, just hiring developers. They were small, and like tech wasn't necessarily their main focus as a company. Like tech was just really there to support their business. So like applying for that company, because they had like looser rules, it just pretty much meant that they gave me a chance. They flew me out, which I don't think is a thing that people do anymore. But they flew me out from, I used to live in the countryside, Kochi, if I haven't shared that. They flew me to Tokyo to take the programming test. I did pretty well, but I didn't finish the test because I didn't realize that there was if you flip the page, they had me build like a website, and I did everything they wanted. But then if you flip the page, there was like more instructions, but I didn't realize like the page had to be flipped. So I'm sitting there like in a 4-hour meeting, just like doing this test, thinking I finished early or something. So I just waited until like the test time to finish, and they were like, "How come you didn't do the other part?" And I was just like, "Oh, I didn't know it existed." And they decided to like take a chance on me anyway, man. I appreciate them for that.
Like, what do you think was like the key that made them take a chance on you, despite maybe that you didn't have quite the experience they wanted, or didn't quite, ace the test? Like, was there one like main thing that was like, because of this, that they agreed to take you on anyway?
Yeah, I think personality goes a long way. I think ambition. I think being young at the time, I was 23 at the time, and just to see someone just so determined at that age, I think that speaks to people. And I think they hired me for potential. At least that's what I imagine they did it for. So yeah, I think it was a combination of my personality, and also it was clear that I knew how to do it as well. So I imagine they also thought like, well, he didn't finish the test, but he did like do everything else right. So like, why not take a chance on them?
Yeah. So that's really interesting. I think one interesting thing that you also said was that you told them a story. And that's also something that I've thought about a lot, actually, in the context of hiring, is like when I was trying to get a job as a software engineer, and I had like specific target companies that I thought were like the best companies to work for. Basically, what I would try to do is basically construct a narrative, like look at my own background and my own skills and whatever I had essentially, and try to construct a narrative that intersected between that and the company's kind of story, and try to tell that in a way that would make it sound like I was like the solution to like their current needs. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Is that how you look at it also, where it's like I need a story that like fits into the kind of this puzzle that is this company and their current hiring needs? Or like, how did you kind of think about that?
Yeah, that's the beauty of me coming from like a bit of a marketing background as well, and like taking sales class. Now, me being a 23-year-old applying for my first software engineering job, I had no experience with interviewing, so I can't say that I did a great job at telling a story at that time. But my second go around, after I left that company, I definitely told the story at that point. Yeah, because I had to. So the first company I had, like I said, tech wasn't their main focus as a business. So honestly, they were just predominantly like an HTML and CSS shop with like a little bit of PHP templates. So they weren't really doing JavaScript, and the front end developers there weren't that good at the programmatic side either. So I looked at that. I'm like, well, the industry is clearly going the React route and these SPAs. So I need to start learning these things on my own. So I started to teach myself like more about programming. What started, I never stopped since I began looking for the job. So as I got better and better, I was like, okay, I want more for myself, and I think it's time for me to like transition from this company. And that's when I started applying for like real engineering jobs. Like JavaScript is like the primary thing that you write, you know. And I remember being in an interview for like the second company that I worked for, Inspective, and just feeling a little bit intimidated, man. Like just being like, okay, everybody at this table, they're clearly better developers than me. Like there's no question. And that's okay. Like that's perfectly fine. I'm doing this all self-taught. At the time, I have like a year and a half of like JavaScript experience. When people ask me for programming advice, I'm like, bro, you need at least 3 years before you even become basic at it. Like it takes some time to become competent at it. So yeah, I remember being in that interview, you know, that roundtable interview, and just telling them like, look, like I think I can do this job because I took the project and I did well on the take home project, but I don't have the most experience. I can't answer every single technical question about JavaScript. I can't answer every single technical question about React. But what I do have that other developers have is the fact that I come from a marketing background. I come from a design background. And the English teaching helped too, because it made me a better communicator and more of a people person, having to like be in front of children all day and talk to them. So the sales pitch that I offered them was like, look, you can hire another developer with a CS degree and have just another person who thinks the exact same. You guys are a startup. You're looking to solve problems. And if you want someone who can understand both customers as well as connect with your design team, I think I'm your guy, because I can act as that bridge that can sit in between the design team, the development team, as well as understand the customer needs and offer a fresher perspective than anybody else at this table could. And yeah, they bought it.
Wow. I think that is really interesting. And even just framing it as like your sales pitch, I think is really smart and something that actually most people don't know to do.
Yeah.
Maybe it is partially your background with like having done sales and marketing in the past, where like you know how to have kind of like a persuasion focused discussion with someone, and you know that I'm selling myself, and you know how to kind of do that, right? Because it's like selling anything else, and how to like construct the kind of narrative behind that that's necessary to make it persuasive, right? But that's really interesting that you were able to kind of figure that out so quickly, and maybe even if it wasn't like the greatest story ever on your first go around, the second time you like kind of nailed it, it sounds like. Yeah.
So you have to lean into it. I tell people when they look for advice, like, hey, I'm an English teacher, because I get a lot of that, especially with the content that I used to make on my YouTube channel that still exists on there. They would say, hey, like, I'm an English teacher. I'm looking to get into, you know, the software industry here in Japan, or maybe they're more, international. And they're like, hey, I went to a boot camp and I'm looking to do what you did. And I tell people, like, don't be afraid to lean into your non-traditional backgrounds, the other skills that you have, because so much of software engineering is those soft skills that you develop, your ability to manage projects, your ability to communicate, understand project requirements, and also understand domain of the business. These are all things that CS degree just won't teach you. And so yeah, lean into it. It's okay to like not know things, because that's just the nature of the business and what we do.
Wow. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's great advice for anyone who does not have a software engineering background but wants to break into the industry. You have been doing something up until now, right? You know what I mean? Like maybe you weren't studying software engineering, maybe you were doing marketing instead. Well, you know what? Most engineers can't do marketing. And actually, like the combination of those two is quite powerful, it turns out. If you want to like build a business, or you want to just be in a company and be a little bit more focused on the product than the average engineer is, like that can be huge actually,
Yes.
for your career and valuable for the business too. So it's like there's got to be something else that you were doing instead of software engineering, and there is going to be some way to connect that value to your work as a software engineer. And then also your point about like it's not just your technical skills. I think that is super important too to understand. And I wish I had realized that quicker in my own experience. Like I think I focused too much because I studied software engineering in school, and I think that gave me a little bit of maybe an inflated idea of the importance of the engineering itself, like the technical skills themselves. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize the importance of like storytelling and sales and marketing. And even if you're just working as an engineer, those are so incredibly powerful. I started working as an engineering manager and was forced to then like be doing a little bit more of that, like talking to people about things and having to persuade people to do things and that kind of thing. And that kind of taught me that skill a bit more. But I realized like at the margin, like improving my tech skills a little bit more is not nearly as valuable as like learning to like do marketing or sales better would be, because the combination of those is a lot more unique. It's rarer, and it's like, I would argue more valuable. So have you found that to be true as well?
1000% storytelling. I tell people also from a non-traditional background, or if you just want to leg up, like, storytell. When you apply it to companies, and most people try to apply it to all the biggest tech companies, you're just another piece of paper in a stack of resumes, if they even print papers anymore. Chances are you're just like another, like, like list item on some sort of like digital dashboard. So how do you separate yourself? Like if you imagine yourself as a product on the shelf at some sort of local supermarket, why would I pick up this can of peanut butter and jelly versus this one? You know what I'm saying? So the idea is branding. It's like, what makes Coke the most sold drink on the planet? It's not the fact that it's the best performing drink. That's subjective. Some people may like other flavors more than others. It's just the fact that when you pick up a Coke, you know what that means. When you buy Nike shoes, you know what it means. It's these touch points. It's this branding. And one of the things that I did pretty well post my second job as a software engineer was I created a YouTube channel, and I began telling my story, and I began doing things such as podcasts and just interviews, and I started to like connect with the people. And I had this mindset very deliberately. I remember one of the most like insightful things that I read like over a decade ago. I was in college at the time. 1,000 True Fans. And that was my logic when I started my own podcast at the time. I'm like, I don't need 100,000 people to watch this. I just need the right people to watch this. If I have like a hiring manager at the company I want see this, that is going to get me into the door where I wanted to be. And like, foreshadowing, it worked. It worked. So it's like, I tell people, okay, not everyone has to like, pick up their smartphone and start shooting TikTok videos. That's like the thing nowadays. But whether it's a blog, whether it's like a GitHub, I mean, you have to do more than just have an active Git. Bring it into context with the storytelling. Tell your story, whether it's through words, whether it's through audio, preferably through video. Tell the story. If you're a software engineer but you didn't go to school for it, embrace it. Lean into the authenticity of that. Think of yourself as like a protagonist in that way, where it's just like, hey, I'm trying to overcome this obstacle, this plot, which is like this metaphorical monster becoming an engineer. And how are you going to slay that monster? Like, start off by saying, hey, write a blog for every single project that you took. Outline the things that you wanted to learn and what you got out of it post-project, and then just keep doing that. When you start building up those artifacts, especially over a course of time, you start to develop an entire narrative about you, and people can see that. People will look at that, especially if you have that like linked on your resume or something like that, or on your LinkedIn, and it just says, hey, I can clearly see that this person was here 6 months ago, and now he's here like in present time. Because of his progress or her progress, I know where he's going to be or she's going to be a year from now. That is a very powerful thing. Like, humans don't, sorry, I might be getting a little bit esoteric, but like We don't care much about facts as much as people think that we do. Like we, as a human, evolution has made us care more about stories. That's what connects with people. People want to, like, we tell ourselves stories every day about our upbringing, about our place in the world. It's the same thing when it comes to making connections. You can go into this interview and you can list a bunch of facts that I studied here, I got a degree here, I built this project, but bring context to it. Why does that matter? What did you gain from it, and how is it valuable? Like, what is the takeaway from this? And I think the takeaway from my story was just, if I had to like look back, an English teacher transitioning to a self-taught a self-taught software engineer who moved to Japan as an English teacher and trying to build a career here was a very simple story to tell, and I told it in my own unique way.
I think a lot of people make that mistake. What they do is to prepare for a software engineering, like whether it's an engineer position or whatever, they just walk into an interview having like done some research on the company and basically memorize like a few facts. They'll walk in and be like, "Hey, I saw that you had like that you raised money and this from these VCs at this time, and like, what are you planning?" Like they'll try to ask these questions, like, "What are you planning to do with that money to like grow the business?" or like that kind of thing. Like they try to like prove that they like know some factoids essentially about the business. But if you put yourself in the mind of that hiring manager, usually it's like an engineering manager or someone like that, that's not what they're thinking about. It's like, "Oh yeah, I saw that article too." Like I guess the people on the business side, like the CTO, and probably cares a lot about that. But my day to day is like building these, projects, and like I have some number of engineers. I need more front end people, and like, maybe I need whatever. That's what they're focused on.
Yeah.
So if you can instead talk about like the things that they actually care about and prove, were I to join this team, you have this need, I provide this basically story to show you that I can fill that need, basically assuage those kind of fears that they might have, right? About like, is this person like going to mess up like our culture that we have? We have a pretty good thing going. And, are they going to be able to fit into the team and like do the work that we need them to do and not basically mess anything up, essentially? If you can just prove that, then that is really like the goal, I think, at the end of the day, because then they're going to be like, "Okay, yeah, I could see working with this person. I can see them fitting into like the current team, doing the things that we need for them to do." And like, I don't think enough people kind of put themselves in the mind of the hiring manager. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. Like, that's what people do when they tell, because like you read these generic like interview tips, and it's like, well, Google the business and start asking questions about these things. But is that really what people care about? Like, really, you said it perfectly. Like, really think about your audience. It's like, does the everyday engineering manager or the senior developer who's interviewing you really cares about what series funding that they just raised? Right. He probably doesn't even know. Like, it's just like, oh, cool, bro. But like, how are you going to relate to me when we're face to face? And so like going back into storytelling, I created a YouTube channel, and I just began like just sharing advice to other software engineers, not from like a perspective of like, hey, I got all the answers, but it's like, again, I'm telling the story in real time. This is what I'm learning. Was making sure I get like the facts correct. I don't want to tell a story out of order, ironically. It's been years since I did this. Yeah, I started with the podcast, and I started doing interviews with people. And then I think after the interview that's when I created my own YouTube channel. And I just started to just talk about my life as a software engineer. Well, long story short, like I currently work at Indeed, which is like one of the most sought after companies here in Japan. But I never applied. I never applied to my role. I know tons of people want the position that I have, and people send applications every day, but I never actually applied. They reached out to me, like the guy who was in charge of hiring for that particular team at the time. He saw my story and was like, "Oh, we're hiring. I think you would be a good fit. Would you like to go through the interview process?" And that's when I was like, "Oh, cool." I gave him my resume and stuff. And then I went through the interview process just like everybody else. But that's how I got that position. So to go back to that analogy I use, because of storytelling and because of marketing, that's one can argue that's like pull marketing. Like he came towards me. I didn't like push my resume towards him. That never happened. So that's like the power of just like effective storytelling and just having like a high level of visibility. And anybody can do that. Again, like if you follow me on YouTube, it's not like I have like thousands of like subscribers. It was some modest following, but I knew my audience. I knew where to post, and I tried to connect with my small audience as much as possible.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I think a lot of people get bogged down in the numbers and trying to basically make the number go up, whether it's the subscriber count or the follower count or whatever. But what you're talking about, I think, is like being a bit more targeted and understanding that, you only need one job, right? Or one hiring manager who's going to reach out. You don't need a million followers to attract that one person, most likely. If you just, the marketing, I guess term would be to like go and fish where the fish are, right? Find the people that you want to target and actually go and talk to them there. The initial version of Japan Dev actually was not a job board. It was like company review site, kind of like Glassdoor. The idea was basically like, there are a bunch of like IT companies in Japan. A lot of them are honestly not good to work for, but there are some pretty good ones actually, like Gaishke's and like more modern kind of startups here. And we just wanted to showcase those. And we had like a ranked list actually in the initial version. And the number one was Indeed, because I had done a lot of research and found that like they were paying very well, like essentially Silicon Valley level salaries, despite being in Japan, and had like this super like kind of international work environment and everything. And that was like my number one most recommended company. And actually, I reached out to someone on Reddit, one of their HR people. I saw like them posting something like randomly, I think about like some other like ancillary topic. It wasn't even about hiring, I don't think. But I was like, hey, I saw you're at Indeed. Like, I have this site. Like, we love you guys. You can even look at the list. You guys are number one. Like, that's proof that we love you. And like, could I like talk to your HR about maybe like having a contract and actually posting some jobs too? And that was how I got. They're my second company. First company was Mercari, which was my own company, where I was actually working at the time. The hack there was that I kind of knew the HR people, so I convinced them like personally. I didn't have to even get the meeting because they were just in the same building. Yeah, it's a similar thing, I guess, of just like finding where that one person that you need to talk to is, and like accessing them.
Exactly. And I want to take a moment, like, you have a blog about this, because this rings a bell. I think I read this years ago on your blog, man.
That one hit on Hacker News, so I got a lot of got picked up, went pretty viral actually. So, but that was literally the story, the story of building Japan Dev, and talking about how I was able to kind of do something very similar and from a different angle, but also attract companies like Indeed and, get them to sign contracts with me.
That's fantastic, man. Yeah. Yeah. The power story, it's compelling.
So it's not like you were focused on Japan specifically. In fact, you were in Hong Kong, and it wasn't even like you came to Japan and were like entranced by it and were like, oh, I love this, and I want to come here even more than be in Hong Kong. You were actually still planning to go back to Hong Kong at some point, right? Despite having experienced Japan. So it wasn't like some revolutionary thing that happened to you where you were like, oh my God, I love Japan, right?
Yeah.
It was more just like out of necessity. It was like, this is the place where I could get the visa, and it seems like a decent place to live, and I'm not being discriminated against like maybe you were in China or other places potentially. You kind of found that position with Interact, the ALT thing, just did that, and then were able to jump into software engineering, and then ultimately able to get the job at Indeed. But I guess I'm a little curious, like just what, like, I guess the work culture is like. I guess that's the one thing that everyone is kind of curious about. A lot of people, I think, want to try living in Japan. They think life here would be really cool. Maybe they have some idea from anime and manga or wherever, and they want to try it, but they hear that the work culture can be quite strict. There's a lot of like overtime, a lot of harassment. They've probably heard the word like karoshi, which is like working oneself to death. There's all these crazy, scary kind of memes about working in Japan. But I guess I'm curious, like, what was your experience in terms of like the work culture of actually being in Japan, working as like a software engineer?
Anecdotally, it's been great. Yeah, I never experienced compulsory overtime. If I did work longer hours, it was 100% to my choice, because I wanted to do this well, or I wanted to get this assignment done just for my own bonus or performance review. But yeah, I've never felt compelled to stay after. In fact, I've had managers who told me, you should probably like go home. You should probably relax. I've never like been compelled to go out drinking with any of my coworkers. I think part of that is because I like picked the right companies. It's not like I haven't experienced companies where I felt like that could have been the case, because when I was interviewing for my second software engineer job, I remember doing interviews. I did a lot of interviews at the time. I remember I went to like this one company around like 7:30 because I got off of work around 6. And I noticed that everybody was still in the office. And I was just
yeah.
It's a sign,
That's
right?
a good hack, actually, by the way, for like, if you want to check You could try to schedule like a super late interview and see how many people are still there, or if they're even willing to do it. Because some people are like, no, we won't do interviews that late. A lot will though, and then you can go and check.
Yeah. And I remember going, and I asked him like, so like, what's your hours? He was like, well, people kind of like come and go as they please, but I'm looking like to the side. I'm like, this looks like a packed office. Like there's no one leaving. So, I mean, obviously no one's going to say, yeah, we work people to death. No one's going to legally say that. So like, that was like my intuition for that company where I'm like, no, that's, let me not do that. I'm going to wait. So yeah, my own personal experience, I've worked for companies where like the first company, 37.5 hours a week of work a week. You know, that's not including lunch. So if you include lunch, a little bit over 40 hours a week. And the first company, great vacation days. That was a European company, 28 vacation days. Love that company.
Wow.
So a lot of free time, a lot of holidays. Second company, startup, they gave you the legal minimum, which is just 10. But I was able to work from home, and I was able to be flexible and take quiet vacations, to say the least. And then you can just Google it. It's unlimited PTO. So it's a very similar concept. I think it's 37.5 hours a week, essentially 8 hours a day. If you just want to like round it like that, 8.5 hours a day, remote first. So I never have to really go into the office, unlimited PTO. You know, that's kind of like a trick in this industry. Is nothing is ever truly unlimited. People are like, what? Unlimited PTO? It's like, yeah, if you get your work done, it's unlimited. But like, go ahead and try to get your work done and take 2 months off of work and let me know how that goes. But I think probably on average, everyone, at least on the teams that I've been at Indeed, probably at least takes 3 weeks off a year. And Japan is pretty generous with the public holidays. So I think when you really add up how many days that people spend away from work, it can probably be close to like a month and a half, depending on how risky you want to be with your own unlimited PTO policy. But yeah, like it's been nothing but relatively good working cultures from my experience. I've never once felt compulsively overworked. I have experienced burnout like any other software engineer. I have spent a little bit too much time at my computer just trying to fix this bug. But that's less about like the company, and it's more so about, man, when you get into software engineering, sometimes you're not even doing it for the company. It's like, I don't want to let this bug beat me. Like, I don't want to get off until I figure this bug out. Like, I am not losing. So, yeah, but I never felt compelled to like stay and work crazy hours.
I feel like any software engineer can relate to that. Just like having this one bug, and you can't let it win. You know, you got to like figure it out. And you just can't figure out why it's not working, and like you know, it looks like there can't be any possible explanation. Like it should work, right? But then like you finally find the thing, and you're like, oh yeah, of course that. You know,
I've lost many a battles, many a bug battles. They're definitely winning.
So you are working as a UX developer now, right? So this is one thing I wanted to actually ask about, because you have obviously the design background. Like you said, you pretty much got into coding in order to implement these designs, you know, starting all the way back with like your MySpace page and stuff. So I guess you were able to find a position where you can really utilize both like the tech side and your design skills. But like, what exactly are you kind of working on day to day? Like what kind of tasks are you doing as a UX developer?
I think UX development at Indeed is just Latin for front end developer.
Okay.
That's all it is. That's all it is.
So
It
in that
changed
case, I
over
think
time.
my question.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the question is then like, so it's like JavaScript, React, whatever front end, typical stack, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Okay. So programming.
Yeah, so Indeed has a particular, you know, UX developer is like this new term that I'm not sure if it's going to have staying power in the industry. There were UX developers at Apple, Google. I'm not sure if they exist anymore. I know a lot of companies are looking to like streamline and like remove like duplication anywhere as possible. But Indeed, its history with the idea of just like UX and UX meet development. I think it originally started as design technologist at Indeed. A design technologist is someone who is familiar with coding, but they weren't necessarily like an engineer. They had coding experience often, but they also had like a affinity for design. And like at Indeed, because it's such a large company, at the time they spent a lot of time prototyping for their UX process. So they had essentially like the specialized role for people who are able to take UX mockups and like communicate with the UX team and work with them very hands-on, unlike a regular engineer who just like works in a standard like sprint with the engineering manager, and like essentially develop mock-ups for user research purposes, or make sure that we're following accessibility and performance standards and doing all of the peripheral stuff that a lot of like full stack engineers, because that's what engineering is at Indeed, is full stack. A lot of full stack engineers just happen to cut corners on. A design technologist was there to fit in that. As that role became deprecated, they created the role called the UX developer. Now, it's very similar, but this one is like you're expected to know more than what a design technologist at Indeed would know, which is React, which is essentially all the things that a front-end developer would know. But depending on the UX dev, some have more for an appreciation for design. But the UX developers, at least at Indeed, they were more so focused on product delivery that you expect that a regular engineer would do, but also design systems. Again, working very closely with the UX team. Like my role at Indeed as a UX developer has transformed, and I would get to the final transformation. But yeah, unlike a regular engineer that was expected to be full stack, that was expected to work in these sprints and work directly under engineering manager, a UX developer at Indeed was more like a floater resource. Sometimes I spend most of my time working directly with the UX designers to get a prototype up. Sometimes I'm helping deliver the other engineers. And yeah, other times I'm just helping to improve some sort of like component library or pattern library that exists within the company. Now, with that being said, the tech industry, and Indeed included, has taken a transition. My role is actually at Indeed is being transformed. I'm going to be a software engineer, just a standard software engineer now. So, yeah.
So full stack, essentially.
Yeah, whatever that means. I'm not a full stack person, but yeah, I still, yeah. I mean, I've played around with MongoDB and like other databases, but I can't really call myself a full stack engineer. At Indeed, you have the freedom to like kind of define what you can work on, because no one wants to put you in a position for you to fail, because that means that the company and the product will fail. So I think 9 times out of 10, starting next month when I transition to be a software engineer, kind of already talked to my manager, I'll be working predominantly on front end stuff. So yeah.
Okay. Cool. So do you feel like you're able to utilize your design background in that role? And I guess probably really throughout your career, I'm assuming you've wanted to kind of do both and make sure that you are utilizing the design background as well. So I guess I'm curious if you've ever been like kind of dissatisfied with like just doing like programming, and do you ever get like an itch to like do more really deeper design focused work, or like how do you think about that?
Yeah, I've been pulled between both sides. There's been times in my career where I spent a lot of time just taking like online bootcamp classes in UX. And then there's been times in my career where I spent like trying to improve my JavaScript skills or improve my backend skills. I will say like trying to like do both is it's a unicorn level task. It's really hard to be full stack, let alone try to understand design as well. And there's some like rock stars out there that are able to do it. I don't think I'm quite that. I think I got a long way, especially because I do other things with my free time as well. So I've been pulled in between both. But I think ultimately what motivates me is just building. I love building things. I'm not really too interested in just maintenance development or just like incremental improvements. I love it when I get a new initiative, like, hey, we have this new project that we're working on and we need to build some sort of thing from the ground up. And I think that's what design affords me. So nowadays I don't really spend too much time designing myself, but because I kind of understand that, I'm able to give that feedback. I'm able to work closer with the UX design team. And I think they trust me more because they understand that I can have like a respectable opinion in this regard. But yeah, these days I don't really have a strong desire to like get hands on with design. I think the future of my career, if the way I'm trying to like gear myself, is just to know enough to be able to have that conversation and collaborate. So yeah, I still read design books constantly. I still try to understand the design process and the overall like product delivery life cycle. And yeah, just stay up to date, but I don't try to be a practitioner of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is kind of it's like a question with no answer, but like you can either be a generalist or like a specialist, right?
Yeah.
And I think in a way you may be choosing to be a bit more of a generalist where it's like, I want to really focus on design and I'm reading books on design outside of work and stuff like that. Yet you want to be doing the programming UX side as well.
Yeah.
And I think some people would say like, oh, it's better to just focus on one, just go straight all in on like JavaScript programming or whatever, be like the best you can possibly be in that kind of niche area.
Yeah.
And then, be a specialist. And other people would say like, no, you want to have multiple things and like kind of stack different skills and have the combination of them be better than, just being really good at one. And I don't know, do you have like a philosophy around that at all? Or
yeah, I don't think there's a right answer. I think it
Yeah.
I think it depends. I think it's a case by case basis. My own opinion, I think it's probably easier to be a specialist. It depends on like what level of expertise you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to achieve like industry like standard like expertise, like the guys who I guess are working at OpenAI to bring you the next like model, whatever. I'm pretty sure those guys are like geniuses. Right. Maybe that's really, really hard. But if your goal is like, hey, I just want to specialize in front-end development, become a senior engineer, staff engineer, it seems like the path to that is a lot more straightforward. When you're trying to be a generalist, you are, and because that's what the UX dev role was kind of at Indeed. And when you're trying to be a generalist, you have to make your case a lot to stakeholders. You have to remind people, well, what do you do? And what, what are your generalizations in? And you have to consistently sell yourself. It takes a strong advocate to really be like a generalist. Because, it's like, how do you explain your role? It's always like your role, comma this, comma that, opposed to I'm a staff engineer. It's a lot more challenging to communicate. So, I hope I answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think it sounds like maybe there's a caveat where if you do want to be a generalist, you need to be able to like explain your value maybe a little bit more clearly and be able to kind of tell that story. Yeah, it's interesting because like everyone kind of starts out fairly general, I guess. And the usual pattern I think is to specialize. Maybe you're like an engineer, you learn like the basics of programming, right? And then you're like maybe front end engineer. Then maybe you're like a React / like maybe front or whatever JavaScript, TypeScript engineer or whatever. And I think the ideal is to have like some individuality, like, and become like a one of one somehow. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you can become someone who is like really, really known for something, and it can be, I think, a combination of things too. Like you can be like the programmer who's also great at marketing and sales and like knows how to just come into a company and like build the whatever new sales pipeline, the whatever, they can just do it all themselves, and maybe you can probably become a lot more valuable in the market that way than if you're just like a JavaScript engineer, Yeah. So I think if you're kind of intentional about it, you can kind of find the perfect niche for yourself and keep niching down, right? Where it's like engineer, front-end engineer, JavaScript engineer, like whatever, TypeScript engineer for like web apps, whatever. And then it's like, you can add extra things and be like the one person who's like the person that you go to if you want that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think the people that I've seen are in like outlier kind of salaries and stuff like that are those people a lot of the time where it's like, yeah, they can also do this thing. And they have this blog where they like whatever esoteric topic, but like top people in that industry that know about that, like follow them and they know that they are like the best at that. Right. So yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe the combination of like that and like your content creation would probably play into that too. I think you're probably building more and more of like a personal brand where even just as an engineer, like you can continue to grow and also level up as a result of that. Are you like conscious of that though, would you say?
Yeah. I think about that a lot, and I wish like I don't think I quite figured out the Rubik's Cube of that yet, or what that looks like. Because I do feel I have felt torn between, am I going to lean more towards the engineering? Am I going to lean more towards design? And then I have to actually react to like my day-to-day task and like what the team needs as well. So I'm not sure like what that looks like in the short term, but I do know in the long term. My former manager, he gave me some really good advice. He said my superpower is communication, and he really encouraged me to like lean into that. So I think that's is probably what I'm going to lean into, regardless of how the other parts end up making up to become, of like whether or not I have like 80% development skills and 20% design skills, or 70% dev skills and 30% design skills. I think the thing that's going to really make my career It's just my ability to communicate, to speak to people, to connect with people who are adjacent to the actual tech development process, and also within the actual, community itself. So I think that's what I'm leaning towards, the storytelling aspect of it. I don't think it's my personal goal to become an elite level engineer. If that happens with time, then that would be a byproduct of time. But it's just more so, I just like making cool stuff and telling stories about it.
I think it's really impressive how, I guess, intentional you are about that, because I don't think that's usually the case for software engineers. It's like there's this kind of pre-prescribed path where it's like, okay, I have to learn this technology and then this, and then, maybe I want to become like a senior engineer and then a staff engineer and then a whatever distinguished engineer or whatever. But I think you like kind of, I guess, probably with some help from your managers and whatnot who've, helped you discover that about yourself. But like, I saw also on your LinkedIn, you even had a passage about this where you were like, with my ability to bridge together the worlds of design and development, I can carry a project solo and work with designers, developers, and other stakeholders. So I can see that that's like something you've kind of zeroed in on. And I think it's really smart because the average communication level among programmers and software engineers is not high, to be honest. So like, it's easy to be an outlier, I think, and be like an engineer. Like, this is the guy who's the engineer who can also communicate, can also be a bridge between teams, and like understands whether it's like the design or the UX side of things, and like can just get the whole project working and get everyone on the same page as each other. That's so much more valuable than like one single engineer just writing JavaScript. Right. Yeah.
So that's what I've been trying to lean into at work. I think I do that pretty well when it comes to freelance projects or like small projects on the side. I think, that quote that you read that's on my LinkedIn, I think it's also like on my website as well. I think I do that pretty well when someone says, hey, I need your help building something, because I can just like, I can explain something, but also know the pieces that I would need to surround myself with to get this project delivered, or if I'm just going to deliver it solely. And at work, it's still a bit of a learning curve for me, and me trying to understand like, how does this work in a corporate sense? Because in the corporate sense, you have to go about it in a particular process. So that's been one of like the gifts and the curse of this, where I think once I like fully crack it, it will bring tremendous value. Not to say it doesn't bring value now, because I think I've done pretty well, but just like when I think about the next phases of my career, when I think about, okay, what's after just like the individual contributor route, I think when I fully understand what that looks like, I think that's when it's going to deliver the most value.
Yeah, I do think storytelling, even just if you were to, for example, become like a manager, like an engineering manager or something like that, I think it is incredibly important for that as well. I remember like we would do, I think every company has some sort of like maybe quarterly kind of check-in event where companies will talk about, or people from different teams will talk about what they're doing, and like maybe do a presentation about like some project and how it's going, that kind of thing. I definitely noticed that storytelling played a huge role in that. Yes. Where we would have like, you've probably had similar experiences where like the different teams will present. One of them will just be dull. They'll say, we did this, we did that, we did that, we did this, right? It's like a list, and everyone's asleep by the end of it. And that could be like the greatest project ever. Maybe it's going to make the company all this money. It's going to transform the company, and it's like, might be the highest priority thing that they're doing. But it sounds just dull, and no one really cares. And then the next person could be this like entertaining person who just tells this story of like, we had this issue and it almost killed us, but at the last second, we were able to figure this out. And then this person was a hero, and he did this, and, worked with this person, and they were able to build this, this solution. And we got this feature released, and here it is, and it's like, that actually makes a huge difference. And I actually feel like the further you get away from like the hard tech, the more it just becomes about your ability to literally communicate and tell stories, essentially be, you said, a bridge, and be able to like kind of make sure that the knowledge is getting passed to the people who need it at the right time, in time to make the right decisions. And then also just like getting the information you need to like decide things. That's the other aspect of it, I think, is like making correct decisions is like the other thing you need to really go high, right, in the organization. And that's almost like a form, it's downstream of good communication, I would say, because knowing what you need to know, having talked to the people, knowing how to talk to them. And I feel like not enough engineers think about that. They're just like, in their own kind of little world there, where they're like on GitHub with their like whatever pull requests and stuff. Obviously, that's super important. That's a big part of the day-to-day job too. But like, you got to think about like the overall like plan too, and like what you want to do with your career and how your work is impacting the company and the business, and like, is it actually making money? Like, or are you on a team that's like kind of not really going anywhere, not really helping the company?
Yeah.
It's not just about your tech stack.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. And like, yeah, even when your ability to tell stories to like stakeholders about the project that you're working on, there's other aspects of how storytelling and good communication can play a heavy role in what you do. The first one I think of is just understanding user journeys. And when you're trying to create a new feature, or you're in those ideation phases with the other members of your product team, understanding, okay, what are the users' needs and how do we think about it from a story perspective? Like, when exactly do they start looking for jobs? What emotions are they feeling during that moment? What sort of frustration and friction points could they be experiencing? These are like kind of things normally that a UX designer do, but if you're also a developer, because I'm pretty sure in a lot of company meetings, they bring a developer there too, and developer almost feels out of place. So he just gives like, or she just gives like, hey, we're going to use this tech stack. But if you want to be more valuable in that area, just trying to think about it from an end user perspective and really humanizing that person. Another aspect that storytelling plays a role into is just that every company has their problems. Every company's have like these parts about their product or their process that's just kind of happen due to habit and neglect. And if you want to like, take on an initiative, the company experiencing inertia, and like, you have to really like find a way like, okay, how do I communicate why doing this is important? How do I get other people to buy in, especially across organizations? That's where that communication is going to like really matter just as much as your ability to deliver, because you won't have that opportunity to deliver unless you get that buy-in.
Totally. I've had so many meetings with like exactly what you described, of like having maybe like the senior engineer, the tech lead on a project come into a meeting, and it's like a bunch of managers and stuff, and they're just talking at a complete different level of abstraction as the rest of the people in the room. They're talking about like the tech stack and the implementation details basically of some project, and it's like, oh yeah, this is possible because if we do this, then we can like use this whatever existing code to like do this. And everyone like kind of gets lost. They don't really know what the person is talking about, because they're just kind of talking past each other. So even just knowing like how to talk to a CTO, you know what I mean? Because it's a totally different, like it's a different like level of abstraction than you're using day to day, like in your stand-ups with your team, who like understand the technical side of things, right? So yeah, I think that so many people, whether you're in Japan or not, could really gain a lot by just focusing more on that and thinking about like really reflecting on your kind of communication style and how well you're actually telling stories that are going to help both you and the company. And if you're able to do that, then yeah, you're going to be more successful, way less likely to get kind of negative reviews or get fired or lose your job or anything like that.
1,000%. 1,000%.
That's right. So you've had some really interesting content. Actually, one thing that jumped out at me is you had a video where you mentioned that you were earning over $100,000 a year. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because it's not common in Japan, I think, to talk about salary. But I think it's really important for these data points to have people that are like, yeah, I was an English teacher. I taught myself how to, code. Now I am working at Indeed. I'm working remotely. I'm getting whatever infinite vacation days, and like, I have an awesome life, and I'm earning over $100,000 a year. So I think it's really important, and I'm really glad that there are people like you that are sharing that. But I don't know, was that a concern at all, like when you did that? And also, like, what was the kind of response to that?
Yeah, so let's like, because I had to think about it. I'm like, okay, I want to tell this story, right? I did something that I thought was pretty unique at the time, and maybe there's stories out there that's similar, but yeah, I came here as an English teacher, and this is all using like years ago, like exchange rates and stuff, because the exchange rate nowadays is just like abysmal.
Right.
But like, I came,
because you should use the exchange rate at the time, right?
Yeah, which was like much more favorable. And I never gave my exact number. Like, like I gave actually a much lower number than what I actually earned, just because I didn't want to tell the real number. So about 100,000, just a great number, just to round to, even if you're rounding down. But yeah, I came here as an English teacher. I made like $20,000 a year. And I think within 4 years, I managed to like 5x it. So like the first year was about 20,000. My first programming job was about 40,000 with that exchange rate. The next job was about 55,000. And then I think by year 4 leading into year 5, 100,000 plus. And yeah, like I thought about it 'cause I'm like, okay, I'm being vulnerable in this aspect because there's asymmetrical information in the market. I'm revealing part of my hand because like it's not the full answer. And honestly, if you really want to know like the answer, like I won't tell people how much I exactly make. But if you want to know how much a developer makes at Indeed, you can just, it's like open information. You can just like look at their website and see that it's much more. But anyways, I digress. Yeah, like it's asymmetrical. Like it's like you're the only naked person in the room type, like asymmetry. It's I'm telling people how much I make, but I'm fully aware of other people won't feel comfortable doing the same. The reason why I do that is because I want to be the example of the change that I want to see in the industry, and just in people in general. It's that companies know how much you make. And that's why I said it's asymmetrical, and like, not just between me and other employees and other like contributors, but it's asymmetrical between us as like, the workers trying to work for these companies. They know how much you make. They know how much the industry make. They know how much they paid the last guy. It does not serve us at all to sit here and be like, I am not going to tell someone how much I make because I feel uncomfortable. I feel like someone is going to judge me. If we're all more open about it, if there's more transparency in the market or the job market, to be more specific, it allows for fairer wages. It allows for better negotiations, and it allows people to get exactly what they deserve in the industry. But this is the case in any market if you study economics, where there's a lack of transparency, there's at the extreme corruption, but there's also inefficiencies. And I think part of the reason why people get paid so low here in Japan is because there's not that, first off, the salary and the cost of living is lower here. So, but at the same time, there's not this desire to like be more open, to be slightly more individualistic in this aspect, just so we can collectively, ironically, through our individualism, make like just rise salaries to everybody. Because if people start to say, hey, as individuals, I make this much, and that becomes a standard, and you're able to know how much people in your industry are making, you're going to start going out and asking for more. You're going to start asking for how much money you make. So yeah, it was a very deliberate choice. It can feel quite uncomfortable at times, but I think I've kind of like shielded by just giving like more so like a general ballpark of how much I make. But I think in the future, I kind of want to be more transparent. I don't know how that looks in terms of like my contract of, can I just outright say I make this much? That's the more challenging part. I tell you, if I ever decide to leave Indeed, I will probably just say this is exactly how much I made at the company. But until then, like I would tell that chapter of the story sometime in the future.
I think that's awesome. I 100% agree with pretty much all your points there in terms of the transparency, basically helping everyone. Well, all of the individual engineers. It doesn't help the companies, but like they'll survive. You know what I mean? Like they are doing fine. So like I completely agree, but it's not super common to see in Japan. But I think it's really great because it gives people something to work towards. You can say like, here's this company. It's hard data. Like I'm earning this amount, whatever. I mean, it doesn't even have to be your exact. You can earn 100K plus at this company doing this job with this background. And here's like, I worked at this company for, a couple of years first, I did the English teaching thing. I gained this skill by doing that. I did I built websites for clients to gain like some scale, like more sales and marketing skills, and then use that. And then ultimately I ended up at this company. And if you do those same things, then you can also earn $100,000 a year as a software engineer in Japan and have a great life and not have to deal with the crazy overtime and all that stuff that people hear maybe horror stories about. So just like the more of those kind of success stories that we can have, I think the more people will be willing to come to Japan,
Yeah. And I think it's important just to share information, especially if you're going to get into like content creation of anything, whether it's blogging or video production. The content creators I respect are the ones that aren't trying to like carry a facade, aren't trying to like gatekeep information, but really just trying to put like, the information in the hands of the people. I know when I was going through my just come up here in my early to mid 20s, there wasn't a lot of information out there. I mean, blogs like yours were incredibly helpful because I looked at like Japan Dev, like I looked at like different sources just to get an idea of like, am I being paid my fair wage? Because that was one of the challenges at my first company. I didn't think I was being paid a fair wage, and there wasn't a lot of data out there. So for me to like tell how much I made at this stage of my career, I think it just gives people just a clear picture of, do they actually really want to come here in Japan and make this much money? And
Right.
if they're in Japan, are they making the money that they deserve? What's so funny, because in my content creation, I remember that video. Man, I had this guy argue me. It was one of the commenters. Like, I ended up deleting the comment because I didn't think it was very productive after a while. But he tried to call me a liar. He was like, people at Indeed do not make that much money. Like, there's no way you can make that much money in Japan. I live in Hokkaido and I make like 3 million yen a year. And I'm like, well, that's how much you make. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is in the same position as you, bro. Like, and then I try to like gently guide the commenters, but then you understand that people on the internet are just like, can be weirdos at times. I was like, bro, if you just look at the information on Indeed's website, you can see that the ranges that I'm giving you are 100% factual. And he was like, that he doubled down. He's like, that's BS. There's no way a person at Indeed make this much. And I think in the video, I didn't say I work for Indeed, so I kind of just like laughed. I was just like, "There's no point in me entertaining this anymore," because I work at the company. We have salary transparency reports. Like, what are you talking about? It's public information. You didn't do your Google, so I ended up deleting the comment. So, I wish I got best of luck.
Yeah, it's tough. There's always going to be those people who are essentially jealous. I guess they're earning a lot less, and it's so far from their experience that they can't believe that it's actually real. But that's why I'm saying, like, you got to have more and more of those people coming out and be like, yeah, I'm earning this much also. Like, more of those data points, right, to kind of prove to people, like, it's not just some one-off thing, like some guy got lucky or whatever. It's like that it's actually attainable.
Yeah. And I try to center my story around being a money guy. Like, you can see that in, like, if you were to like look at just content in general within like the software development space. I mean, it used to be a trend to say this is how much I make, and people kind of like make that their whole thing. You can kind of find it on TikTok and stuff. Advice from a 200K meta engineer, advice from a $500,000 like Amazon engineer. And I get it. I'm not saying those things are bad because they serve their place in the ecosystem, and I think they could be very powerful. But it's just like, that's, even with my transparency, has never really been like the root of my content and the things that I try to communicate to people. It's just a supporting point. Like, hey, like, I just want more just real answers. Because when I went on Reddit at the time, I haven't really checked it, and I started looking at all the advice that people give. Like, there's a lot of information that's just like so believed, but they're myths. Even during my salary negotiation process, I remember scrolling through like Reddit comments, and people are saying like, well, you have to submit, there's no point in negotiating salary in Japan because you have to submit your tax returns. They're gonna know how much you make. And I'm like, that's not exactly true the way you're framing it. Like, yes, you do have to submit your tax returns to the next company and how much you make, or your pay slips. I forgot the exact thing. Maybe they're not tax returns, but you're essentially submitting a document that has your pay on it. But you can do that after the negotiation. Like, you can just choose not to reveal it. And when I was going through my third stage of like looking for a job, I remember when I got asked a question, I just stopped answering the question. Like, sorry, I don't feel comfortable revealing that. I'm much rather just focus on the value that I bring. That's how we should have this discussion. Not, you're going to look at what I'm being paid right now, which is a really arbitrary fact for the company to know, and just say, I'm just going to give them 10% more. Like, why does that matter? You should pay me what I'm worth in this present moment in the market. One of the things I also learned too is that at the time, I learned not to, if you're working with recruiters, just my own personal opinion, but do what you will. I don't tell recruiters my salary either, because they would just tell the company. And I've had that experience where like the recruiter just told the company he makes this much. And I was like, why did you do that? So
they might even claim they won't tell them, but they will.
Yeah.
In my experience. Well, not always. I'm not trying to say every recruiter would do that kind of thing. There are some that there are honest ones that wouldn't, but most would, in my experience. Anecdotal, but I think that they usually will just tell the company.
I'm with you. Because I went through this whole long process just to find out. Wait, they already know? I thought we kind of covered don't mention this, and they mentioned it to the company. So I didn't go for that job.
And even if they don't directly tell them, they're going to negotiate on your behalf with that knowledge and the knowledge that the company's ultimately trying to just pay you as little as they can, get away with paying you, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. That's just how the game theory kind of plays out, right? You want them to pay as much as possible. They want to pay as little as possible. That gets you to still work for them, right? So they'll still pretty much put out numbers and stuff like that based on that. So you really can't win by telling them your salary. And so I'm very interested to hear about this, actually, because I've talked about this like publicly and privately with many people. And I feel sometimes like I am like crazy, because people seem to have had this very different experience than me, where For me, like my first company, my first engineering company, I was actually an ALT as well. So I was doing like whatever, $25,000 for my first job. And then my first job as an engineer was like 35,000 or so. And I didn't negotiate that at all. And I realized later that everyone was earning like way more than me. Everyone else was 50,000, and that did not feel good. And I ended up leaving that job. And from that point on, I did what you said, and never told them my current salary, never told them my expected salary either. Yeah. It was just like, yeah, basically the same kind of lines that you were saying, where it's like, I don't really see how my previous salary is relevant. I mean, I was extremely polite, but it was like, I'm looking to make a step up in my career to like kind of the next level. And I want that to kind of be based on like my experience. I've worked really hard, but inside of my work, outside, to like learn as much as I can. And I want my new like role to kind of reflect that progress, and like, looking forward. And I would say like, oh, I want to stay, kind of like imply that I want to stay for a long time, that I'm serious about the job change and everything. So like, I expect like kind of a step up in terms of salary too, based on like my skills and my experience, not just like, my previous role. And like, if you're just super polite and continue to be like kind of optimistic, and not, as long as you don't get like snarky, because, that can definitely kill the negotiation. If you're like, like, in California, it's illegal to ask people that, if you get like snarky about it or something like that, because that, I think it shows a personality trait, like a negative personality trait in you. And that's why you end up losing potentially the role.
That's a great point.
Right. Like I never hear anyone like who just negotiated, like tried negotiating basically, and lost the offer as a result. I feel like usually when that happens, there's like some deeper reason. Yeah. Like you did it badly, or in a way that showed kind of something about you that the company didn't like. It's not just the negotiation itself, in my experience. And yeah, every single time. So for me, like Japanese startups, I mean, I had a similar, I don't think I increased quite as quickly, but from the ALT to like 100K plus as an engineer, also, I think over like 6 or 7 years for me. So you did it even faster, which is impressive. But, and I really think it was in large part because I negotiated and did not tell them my previous salary each time.
You made a great point. Like, for one, I never, because you're right. Like, I've never had a company that, because they might push back a little bit, like, well, this is usually the way that we do things. But if I just like stand firm and I'm just polite about it, because it's not personal, so you don't have to get emotional about it. Exactly. And just say, well, I'll be more comfortable sharing that information afterwards. Most people don't push, because you got to think, if you're a company and you're employing somebody, I mean, I never employed somebody before, but I kind of like get like the mindset. I'm thinking about it from their shoes. Hiring people is expensive. It's not cheap at all. It costs companies a lot of money, and for them to have engineers, engineering managers, HR people that take the time out and interview you, give you a test, follow up with you on like a every other day basis over a course of weeks or a month or two, is very expensive. If you've managed to make it to the stage of the salary negotiation, 9 times out of 10, you are the best person in that pool of candidates that they found. And they would have to go back all over again, maybe choose a lesser candidate. Or if they already rejected everybody because they really wanted you, they have to start this process all over again. So they have, in most cases, they have every incentive just to come to a good offer with you, opposed to just going through this headache. And I'm sure there's an opportunity cost them as well if they decide to like, go through this hiring process again, because these companies are filling this role for a reason. They have things they need to deliver. They have objectives. They have like quarterly like OKRs. So when you think about it from that perspective, it's like, no, you should feel a little bit comfortable. And if you're not that good with like talking about it in person, you can always just say, hey, can we do this via email? I need some time to think and reflect on my answer. And no one's going to make you have the conversation right then and there.
Yeah. I think companies understand that, what you said about how like the later in the process you go, the more they've invested in you. So a lot of times, at least in my experience, like one of the first interviews, like maybe the first interview with the HR person, they'll try to ask just to get it out of the way and like get you as quickly as they can. So I think the first line of defense really is to just like kind of kick the can down the road and push it back in the process and be like, yeah, so I'm still researching. I'm talking to a few different companies and I don't have like a full understanding of the market rates at this point. So I'd be happy to talk about that as like a part of the offer, assuming that I'm like lucky enough to get one. But it feels a little too early to be like discussing details of the offer at this stage. So like, if I could just have a little bit more time, that's the kind of thing I would always say. And I would do that like literally with like one company would ask me like the first interview, they asked me again, and I'd basically say the same thing, or like kind of just like slightly different iterations of it, you know, but just like, while again being like, I love this company, like I really am impressed with what I've seen so far. I think this could be a really good fit, but I'm still, you know, doing some research and whatnot, and I want to be like very careful about how I communicate with things like this. And like, yeah, and I also think it's helpful to position it as like a detail of the offer, and so like I want to have like a holistic view of any like offer, and look at it along with like the vacation package and the whatever, and like think about the you know, whatever remote work requirements versus like other companies that I'm looking at, so that kind of thing. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can say.
Yeah, and it's all a sincere answer, because you have
if it's
get all the information. Like when someone asks you at interview number one, like, well, I haven't even met the team, I don't know how intense the work culture is going to be, I don't know like the different benefits, all of that, I have to wait before I can give you an answer, or I'm just throwing out a random number. So like, even when you really think about it from a logical perspective, it just makes sense just to wait.
Exactly. And it shows that you're like thinking, like you said, sincerely about the position in a way. If I were the hiring manager, it would kind of make me want to hire the person more, because it's like, oh yeah, they're like seriously considering us and being intentional about this role, not just trying to like throw numbers out there and get a quick kind of like number as quickly as possible. It's like, this is the kind of person maybe who will be intentional and like really consider us thoroughly, and maybe be like, as a result, maybe like the kind of person that we want to hire, right? It could even be a benefit. Yeah.
And so, all of this, just to wrap the point, all of this, like it comes, at least I would like to add, like just like the privilege of, if you already have a job that meet your needs, it becomes much easier. If you're,
so true.
If you're a 22-year-old English teacher and you're just like, I'm just trying to get what I can get so I can get my foot in the door, I won't say don't negotiate, but I get it if you feel like you just need to take it. I still think you should like try to get as much as you deserve, but I can understand if you're like, I'm just going to try to get my foot in the door as much as possible. But when you're already saying comfortable, it's like, you got to think like, I have to work. If you're going to accept this offer, I'm going to be working for this company for, if you wanted to look respectable on your resume, you had to be with the company for like 2 years. So it's just like, are you really going to feel comfortable working this lowball offer for like 2 years? So yeah, like really be, you know, you said it, like methodical, really be sincere in your approach, and just think through, like, is this something that you feel comfortable with during a negotiation? Like, is this a salary that I can say, hey, this makes me want to wake up and do my job?
I'm glad to hear that you have had success with that method as well. I mean, I know it does depend on the company and like kind of where you are. If you're like more junior, it's a bit more difficult, but like I did it for like my second job ever.
Same.
Yeah. Right. Like, and this for me was like small Japanese startup. So my first company, I did not do it. Like I said, regretted it, learned that lesson the hard way. And then from that point on, did it every time. And ultimately, like I worked at Mercari, which is like a super international company. Indeed is obviously super international as well. Mm-hmm. So people might think like, oh yeah, of course, like these big, like American kind of companies and these like companies with lots of foreigners working there are okay with it. But I've done it with small Japanese startups too. Like the first time I did it, my interviews were in Japanese. I was like the only non-Japanese person at the company. And like, they were surprised. They kept asking me. I kept refusing, but I was just super polite about it. And like, you know, sincere, like you said. And I was still able to even convince like a pretty small Japanese, not particularly international company. Mm-hmm. So like, I've just seen it work so many times, but I see a lot of people online saying you cannot negotiate your salary in Japan. And it's not true.
Yeah.
I know for a fact. Yeah. Like you said, though, if you're just, you got to get out of the English teaching or whatever, you know, you just want to move on from something else and you really are not enjoying your current kind of role, then it can be a little bit more understandable to just not even try. Maybe if it's high enough, whatever, salary, high enough bar that even if you maybe could have gotten a little bit more, it's not worth the risk. That situation kind of exists as well. So it is a case by case thing. Yeah. So you've been in Japan, I guess now for about 8 years. And even though you didn't have any kind of like deep reason for coming here, maybe it was more of just a circumstantial thing where you just ended up here, but it has been 8 years now. I guess I'm curious, like, have you learned to love Japan? Do you think you'll be here maybe for the long haul, or are you trying to maybe go somewhere else at some point? Or what's your like relationship now with Japan? I guess is the question.
Okay, so I still don't love Japan. I don't dislike it. I don't dislike it. It's okay. Like people, I think I love Tokyo. I don't think I love Japan. Like it's
Mm.
okay. Like
Mm.
it's I'm not sure if I love the US either. So it's not even just me being like this is an inferior place. It's just that
Right.
when I think about what I want for my life, I'm still trying to understand like how does Japan fit in it. But
Mm.
at the same time, I've been here for all of my 20s, basically, like saying 2 years. Like most of my 20s, I just turned 30 recently. So this
Congrats.
is pretty much, thank you, my all
Mm.
of my adult life. So I'm used to it. I've spent more
Mm.
time in Japan by far than I did in the US just as an adult. So I think I am going to stay here a little bit longer. I just applied for my permanent residency. I'm
Uh-huh.
at the stage where I think I want a little bit of diversity. I want to kind of hedge my bet like in
Mm.
between the US and Japan, just in case the US, like, keeps going down certain directions. And maybe I
Right.
just want a
Right.
backup plan. But at the same time, I look at some of the macroeconomics of Japan, and I do have my concerns as well with an aging
Mm.
population that puts a strain on the economy, that puts increased taxes, longer working hours for the people who are still of working age. That
Mm.
has one of the highest, if not the highest, like GDP to debt ratios, like in the developed
The
world.
highest.
So
Yeah.
I think about that, and I also think about the long term economy of like, okay, the yen is weak. There's no I mean, this is just my own personal opinion. This isn't financial advice for people, but
Mm.
I don't see when I look at all of those things that I outline and more the scenario where the yen would get stronger, especially if they keep interest rates low. So I'm just like, okay, from a salary perspective, if I want to make the most money, which I do want to make money, is
Right.
Japan the place that I need to be. Now, when I do like the back of the envelope calculus for myself, and I'm like, okay, if it was just strictly about the money, I'll move to the US. The US is it's a terrible place to be average in, but it's a wonderful place if you're trying to be world class. If you are trying
Okay.
to make the most money, if you are trying to work at an international company or a prominent tech company, you want to be in the US. And I
Mm.
think that for myself. You're clearly closer to the senior leadership team because they're also US based. You have better chances of bumping into the CEO or bumping into some sort of like startup investor and just being around that energy. Like you go, especially you go to one of those like tech focused cities. It's a agglomeration of all those knowledge workers all in one area that makes Silicon Valley, Seattle, to an
Yeah.
extent, Austin and New York very valuable. Tokyo is a little bit different in that regard. It's not much of a risk
Mm.
taking place. It's not very innovative in comparison to the US. The government is
Mm.
trying to incentivize that in certain places like Fukuoka, and there is a startup scene in Tokyo, but it's
Yep.
nowhere near the comparison to the US. And I'm thinking,
No.
okay, eventually for me, if you want to see like, hey, what's the ending to Terrance's story? As I
Right.
write this story, I kind of want to build my own product one day. I want to make my own company again one day, but more so
Mm.
product based instead of freelance based.
Mm.
So there's a scenario in which I can do that in Japan. I can have like a lifestyle based tech business. Plenty of people do it.
Mm.
I see Japan dev as that. I don't know if you see it as that, but it seems like
Yeah.
this
Pretty
is yeah,
much.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's an option, and I kind of like that option because I don't have this desire to be hyperly rich. I just want to be well off and just have my own independence and just do the
Mm.
things that I want to do. So that's more so what I'm leaning towards. And in Japan, I think I can do that. I mean, it's universal health care. The cost of living is good. I think what's the long term strategy for me is like if I can find a way to make US dollar and live in Japan, that's what I want.
Yeah.
So I need this permanent residency so I can like, just be a little bit more nimble. I also consider
Yeah.
going back to school as well, but I don't know. I'm a pragmatist, man. Like I talk to my therapist. I'm a pragmatist for better or for worse. I like to just look at the landscape and just respond to
Mm.
like my environment. Like I have a vision, but even my story this far is just me maneuvering through different
Mm.
obstacles that are in front of me, not because I had like this grand vision.
Right.
So I think Japan is a possibility that I can be here for the long term. And by I'm defining long term by until I'm 40 or
Mm.
late 30s. So like the next 5 to 10 years is like what I see. Because I do want to buy a house. But if the opportunity presents itself, I don't really have too strong of a tie to Japan. Like if there's a
Mm.
great opportunity in the US, I might just take it.
So,
I'm open to taking it. I do want to get my permanent residency so I can just come back here anytime. But yeah,
yeah.
it's been 8 years. I still haven't learned the language. So like that's how I'm going to learn a language this year. I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it my goal. I don't like that being a part of my story. That's not intentional,
Mm.
but it's just I've been busy focusing on other things. But I don't have like this marriage to like be here in Japan. I mean that metaphorically. I'm not literally married. But
Right.
like, I don't have like this idea that I want to be in Japan for the rest of my life. I play it by ear.
That sounds very pragmatic. Get the PR first.
Hmm.
Get some optionality, right? So you can stay, you can go away for a while and still come back and not have to deal with all the visa, stuff, and be open to maybe just starting a business here, or because there are people who do that. I opted to charge companies in yen when I built my business, which is unfortunate. I wish I had charged in dollars instead, because I know a lot of people who run businesses, but they have whatever, just globally minded businesses, or ones that even have Japanese clients, but they charge in dollars, and they are all very happy right now. you know, and yeah, you can live a great life. Is it the absolute best place to just optimize your income and make as much as humanly possible? No, that's the
Hmm.
US. And since you're from the US and you have access to that market too, that I think it's smart to at least be considering that, and keeping in mind, if I were to go to the US, I'd be able to achieve maybe this in this timeline or whatever. Whereas in Japan, like, in order to do something similar, I'd have to do these things. And maybe the only way really is to have my own business, or if you have certain goals around like salary and things like that,
Hmm.
beyond the level that you can get at like a place like Indeed. So I don't know. I think it sounds like you have like you're setting yourself up to have a lot of options and be able to kind of make the right choice when whatever the opportunity is that arises.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. So yeah, I'm in that whole new chapter of my life, man. I'm in that pre-permanent residency chapter of, yeah, I just
Mm,
turned 30 like last month. I'm starting
cool.
to like think, okay, I did a lot in my 20s. Yo, what do I want the next couple of years to look like? So
Mm,
yeah, I'm still defining that right now, but I do know
mm,
it looks like me getting my permanent residency, but the rest I'm still gonna try to figure out along the way.
cool. Well, I think we went very much over time. I'm sorry about that, but it was
That's
a
fine.
really fascinating discussion. I wanted to. I think we covered a lot of ground. But yeah, I guess lastly, I don't know. Do you just have any advice? I guess if someone who has seen your path maybe wants to do something similar, is there anything that you would tell them to just make sure that they are able to kind of succeed and maybe do what you did?
Yeah, watch my videos. but
There you go.
but that's just one. I do have a lot of videos on there where I've just went into more detail than I can even remember in this present moment,
Go.
because it was fresh when I made those videos. But I say life becomes easier when you align yourself with your values and you try to live a
Mm,
life based on what you value. If you're
mm,
going to come to Japan, or if you're living in Japan and you're looking to make this pivot, I understand this desire to compare yourself to others and look at social media and say, hey, this guy has a life that I want. His life seems so amazing, or her life seems so amazing.
mm,
But really start off by asking yourself, what do you want in life? Does it align with your values? And then just live a life based on that. And I think finding satisfactory in that is the most important thing, because to be honest, my story is hard work, preparation, but it's also luck mixed in there. Even if you
mm,
follow my advice to the T, the market dynamics are different. We're in different times. Companies are spending have different budgets these days. You won't
mm,
get the exact same results. So
mm,
if you're trying to replicate me or replicate somebody else, I think you're leading yourself down a path of lower fulfillment. If
mm.
you clarify what you want and you live a life aligned with your values, the externalities and awards are extra. It's exactly that. It's
Okay.
extra to what you have. And that's
Mm,
what I've been trying to do my entire 20s, is me just doing it the way I felt best. I done
mm,
such a non-traditional way to get me into this path, not because I knew at the end would be like one of the highest paying software engineering jobs in the
right.
city, but it was
Mm,
more so that I want to live a life aligned with my values, and that's how I like to
mm.
choose to spend my time on this planet. So yeah.
I see. Yeah, I mean that's definitely one of the big takeaways I think for me from your story as well. I think you are doing an amazing job of just like being intentional, about both your career and just, your life in general, and just doing the self-reflection that I think a lot of us fail to do. It's super easy to just like get in kind of a rut and just let yourself kind of be taken on along the ride of life, right? Whereas I think you are doing a lot more like introspection and being able to just be a lot more intentional about that. So that's one thing that I think I can learn from your story, and probably a lot of other people who are listening can as well. And I think that's great advice. So
yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for that. And this has been such a pleasure, man. Like I said, you played a part in my story, even from a distance, before we even ever met. So when I got your message, I was like, of course I want to do this podcast because, yeah, man, like, because when you told the story about Mercury and they were your first client indeed, I was like, yeah, I remember that because I used to check like Japan Dev blog like literally all of the time just for like information. Whenever I was looking for a job, I tried to apply for companies. I looked at companies. My second job, they post frequently on, I don't know if they still do, but at the time,
yeah,
like Sinspective, they were like a Japan Dev client. So
yep.
Yeah, man, it's been such a pleasure to like, like what's it called? Like if we keep using this storytelling like analogy to like our plots have finally crossed. You ever seen like a TV show where it's just like, all right, there's a story happening here and a story happening there, like in Game of Thrones, like when is Daenerys going to meet, get to Westeros and like interact with like Tyrion and everybody else? It's kind of like that, man. Like, and to me at least. So yeah, man, it's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, the same is true for me as well. I've been aware of your content for a long time and actually looked up to you as a content creator because, I mean, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, but you are putting an incredible amount of effort, and obviously like it reflects your kind of design background. You have this sense for design that I frankly don't have. And it makes me want to get better though at that and like learn more about like how you are putting together your videos and stuff. They're extremely high quality. So speaking of your videos, where can people go to, to experience that?
Most actively, I'm on Instagram, Terrance, TERRANCE 95_. I say also follow me on YouTube as well. Terrance Reynolds, just type that in. I'm pretty sure if you type in Terrance Reynolds Japan in the search bar, or you will find me, or if you just go to youtube.com/Terrance Reynolds, you'll also find me there. I am going to start posting, because I haven't been cross-posting. I'm going to start posting more on my YouTube for the content that I'm making as well. And I think soon I'll probably create a TikTok as well. I've been kind of like, dragging my feet on that. And I've been debating whether or not if my content fits LinkedIn. I don't know if I should post my life reflections on LinkedIn. I don't know if I'm still debating whether or not I should do that. But yeah, follow me primarily on Instagram and YouTube, and you'll hear more from me. And feel free to reach out to me via DMs. I always try to respond.
Okay, awesome. So we will make sure to include links also in the description so you can look down below and get links to all of Terrance's content. I would highly recommend checking it out. Like I said, it's some of my favorite video content about working in Japan, and some of your like more general like life focused stuff has been really high quality too. So I was looking at that earlier today. It's awesome. So highly recommend it. And if you did enjoy this video, if you got any value from it, then leave us a comment. Definitely like the video. Please subscribe to the channel because we're going to be doing more of these interviews with people like Terrance. So yeah, check it out. And thank you so much for watching.